Okay, right. I think we'll get going then. So welcome back to our members who attended the AGM this morning. Great to have you still with us. And a warm welcome to all of those just joining us for the Wild Remedy webinar. We're very pleased to have your company this afternoon. And we will also be announcing the winners of the BBOWT photography competition after hearing from Emma. But firstly, a little bit of housekeeping. So just to point out that we are actually recording this session and there will be some time following this afternoon's talk. So do please put these in the Q&A and we'll try to get through as many as we can just now. So welcome everyone. At this afternoon's event, we're going to be hearing from our wonderful speaker, Emma Mitchell, about the importance of nature and well-being, followed by the Photography Awards. So over to you, Karen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Hartshorn. I'm Fundraising, Marketing and Communications Director here at BBOWT. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce author and naturalist Emma Mitchell to speak to us today. So Emma is a Sunday Times best-selling author, and she's also a mental health advocate, a naturalist, and an illustrator. And she's also the designer and maker of jewelry inspired by the natural world around her. And her latest book is called The Wild Remedy: How Nature Mends Us. It's a beautifully illustrated diary charting Emma's journey through nature and mental health, and available in booksellers now. I can attest to how lovely it is, and several of my friends have received copies of it for presents. So it's a beautiful book. And we are really delighted that Emma's here today to give us some reflections and some thoughts on her journey. So as Estelle mentioned, if you do have any questions or comments while Emma is speaking, please do add them to the Q&A box that you should have on your screen as we go. And at the end of the talk, we will try to get to as many of them as we can. Okay, so Emma, I am absolutely delighted to hand over to you without further ado.
Karen, thank you. That's lovely. And you plugged my jewelry. That's very kind. It's actually properly moving and very encouraging, I suppose, to hear that you've given my book to a few friends. That's great. My book really is it's aimed at helping anyone who's feeling low and or anxious, and I think that applies, frankly, to most of us since approximately March 2020. And what I'm going to do is to give you, I'm going to be talking a lot about brains today, which sounds a little bit alarming. I don't mean brains in jars, I mean the brains inside our skulls right now. And also the brains that belonged to our ancestors and how what they did in order to stay alive can now be used is perhaps the wrong word. Oh, hold on, I'm slightly distracted by a very large duck. Right, okay, sorry. Can now be used really to help our mental health. So yeah, I'm going to just give you a little tiny bit more about my background. I trained as a molecular cell biologist. So I was in academia, I was a scientist, and pretty obsessed with how, oh, another duck, wow. That's very large, right. I trained as a molecular cell biologist, and I was always obsessed with how cells worked, you know, how signals came from the cell membrane into the nucleus to change gene expression, and therefore either, for example, make a tadpole embryo from a fertilized egg, or, for example, and I'm going to be talking about this kind of thing much more today, or signaling, for example, at the cell membrane of a nerve cell in our brains, and to create a signal that would literally form the basis of our thoughts or change the tone of them. And that's what I'm going to kind of get you thinking about today. So really what a nerve cell does is to change its gene expression, change the surface of it, and actually have a little electrical signal that moves along it. And that is literally the basis of what we're thinking about at any one moment. Of course, there's not just one nerve cell. We're not a tiny little nematode with about, you know, hardly any nerve cells at all, maybe about 3. we've got billions, millions, if not billions, but that process of a signal molecule coming and sitting on a receptor at the cell membrane of a nerve cell, and then that nerve cell creating a minuscule but significant electronic signal that travels along its axon, which is the little tiny, almost like a wire, like a little tiny pipe where the electrical signal moves along. Many, many millions of cells doing that at any one time creates the tone and the actual kind of the words and the pictures that are our thoughts. And of course, the words and pictures that we've received from the news are increasingly encroaching on our thoughts and changing the nature of them. Nature, I didn't mean a pun there, but, you know, changing the tone and the kind of frenetic, anxious tone. The way in which we're thinking is much more, I think, affected by what happens in news headlines, and especially on social media, because we're bombarded with it, than say 20 years ago. And what's happened in the last 2 to 3 years in worldwide politics, and of course the pandemic, has meant that for many of us, the actual chemistry, the soup of neurotransmitters, the balance, the sort of the pie chart of neurotransmitters, if we think about sort of serotonin, dopamine, I mean, there's many, I'm going to just give you the headline ones there. Serotonin, sort of dopamine, cortisol affects it too, which is our stress hormones. The pie chart looks different now than it did 3 years ago. We were seemingly a different country, and we were certainly different in terms of our perception of viruses and how a threat could come from nowhere that could literally be life-threatening. So we have had a lot of change in here, all of us have, for lots of different reasons. So I'm going to take you back to, I'm just going to put my phone off as well. Sorry, that was a text message. Apologies, I should have done that earlier. I'm going to take you back sort of 10 to 20,000 years, all right, to our ancestors. And we're probably going to sort of focus on a couple, a man and a woman. We're talking kind of standard binary couple here, but that's not to say that there were not LGBTQ communities in Neolithic times. I'm sure there were, but I'm talking about a man and a woman who are necessarily wanting to have, or have perhaps already had, children, and we could even give them names. So let's call them, I don't know, Bernard and Nancy. All right, so what they are doing is living in a small community. They've got some kind of like mud huts, etc. Maybe you can think of the round houses that you sometimes see on Time Team when it was still on television, and sometimes Professor Alice Roberts sort of examines what they find in those kinds of communities. So I'm talking about they had fire, they had flint technology, perhaps they also had metal technologies, so maybe sort of Bronze Age, that kind of era. And if I'm wanting you to think about their everyday lives, really. And this sounds a little bit like a boring history lesson, but bear with me. It is totally relevant to the nerve cell introduction that I've kind of set the scene with, because the things that they're doing every day in order for themselves to stay alive, and certainly for the very, very precious little bundles of genes with legs that they've created with their loving Congress. If they've got little children, then it's extremely important that they do everything they can to sort of ensure their survival if they possibly can. And the things they do to ensure their survival have actually changed and laid down the nerve cell pathways that I'm going to talk about today. So Bernard and Nancy doing their stuff out in, I live in the Fens here, so it's pretty flat. There would have been a lot of water and a lot of ducks, actually. Sorry about the slight distraction. It was an extremely large duck with a very knobbly face. I think it was a Muscovy duck, and it just started wandering past. So I apologize if I was slightly distracted. It was large and slightly I was slightly overawed by a duck. But anyway, they would have been very much in Duckland back in sort of 5, 10, whatever, 1,000 years ago, Bronze Age, Neolithic times, those kinds of times with a roundhouse and, you know, a sort of a roof thatched with probably reeds taken from the fens. And day-to-day life would have been quite a lot of getting food, because of course Tesco did not exist. What they needed to do was to go out and not just get food, actually. The foraging was also for medicinal plants. Now I've got some plants here. I've got a rose hip, some rose hips. They're slightly dried because I gathered them a few weeks ago. I'm not going to be distracted again, but the duck is actually literally standing outside my window trying to converse with me. I'm not taking any notice. This is hawthorn. Again, it looks a little bit dry and it's not very bright. You know, normally they're much brighter than that. But this is the kind of stuff they would be gathering, okay, on the fens. Oh, there's some oats here too. That would have been a super great find. Some wild oats there. Not necessarily sowing them, gathering them. Although okay, I won't be distracted with that. Okay, so they would be going out, finding all these kinds of things, medicinal plants, plants to make soups. And the hawthorn here, I wish I'd got you some slightly brighter ones. They were very bright when I picked them. They look rather dull now, okay? But imagine they're as bright as these little rose hips here. The hawthorn, for example, would have been a brilliant plant for them to be gathering right now, because inside here there's a seed which they need to get rid of, but there's a little bit of flesh around the hawthorn and the rose hip, actually, of course, and they could gather the hawthorn and then process them. Quite a lot of sort of grinding. They would have perhaps been sort of using stones or some kind of tools or processing, like a kind of like a KitchenAid for the Neolithic times. And they perhaps, I'm afraid, again, it was a little bit old-fashioned in terms of gender roles in those days. It probably would have been a group of the women sitting around with toddlers and children with them, and they would have been processing things like these hawthorn berries. And the reason they'd have done that is major vitamins, so they could have perhaps had an immediate partial meal or even some kind of a pudding business. But that this can be turned into, you may have seen Euphemia Whittingstall do it, the flesh of the hawthorn berries can be turned into a fruit leather, okay, and that could be dried out over the fire in their roundhouses and stored over the winter. An amazing source of nutrients in the time where there was very little in the hedgerows, next to nothing on the trees except perhaps certain fungi, and not much until perhaps sort of February time, where they can maybe then start to tap the sap, or February, March, tap the sap of birch trees and things like that. Then you start to get shoots coming through in March. So there would have been this period where things were really tough. So they had to shore up and store food now in this kind of time of plenty. So Bernard and Nancy would have been doing a lot of that. Bernard would have been going out, and perhaps I wish I might actually have to show you the ducks. There they are. They perhaps would have been taking our small friends here who are just grazing on my garden as a source of meat and protein. You know, sad times for Muscovy ducks, but Bernard and Nancy would have needed that meat. And there would have been a lot of water birds around, you know, things like moorhens and cormorants, things like that. That would have been dinner. And I know it's hard for vegetarians and vegans, but that would have been the case. Now, the reason I've waffled on about the kind of menu that Bernard and Nancy would have been sort of gathering from their environment, literally from the landscape, is because when they went out there, let's say there was a group of women, Nancy and her mates, and they knew what they needed. They needed some hawthorn berries. They were going to make a whole vat of sort of hawthorn compote. I bet you don't get that down Waitrose. And they would have probably turned it into fruit leathers, or similar, to store over the winter. Amazing for kind of fending off colds, but also a brilliant source of sweet food, you know, immediate food. And say they were also going to go out and sort of forage for some medicinal plants, maybe yarrow. There's a lot of yarrow still in flower, things like that. Okay, they would have gone out with sort of backpacks. Maybe some of them would have had babies on their backs. They would have gone out with the kids. And on a day like this, it's absolutely beautiful, sort of liquid autumnal sunshine. very ducks just grazing. Wow, that's an unusual duck face. And they would have brought back a haul, H-A-U-L, of really useful stuff. Now, as they went out into the landscape, they would have stepped out from their roundhouses, Nancy and her pals, and all of the kids with them probably. There would have been an immediate reaction in their brains. So their nerve cells in Nancy and her mates' brains would have reacted almost immediately to the sunshine. Okay, so when serotonin hits our retinas, there would have been when sunshine hits our retinas, we would release serotonin. But just seeing the colour green out there, and then beginning to kind of perhaps get to the point where they were in a bit of woodland and they were starting to examine the botany in the lower story of the woodland, they would have been looking at the plants quite intently, you know. And I don't know if you've ever done that. I'm sure you have. You've gone into a wood and perhaps you're looking for the early purple orchids, or you're looking for a bee orchid or something, you know, maybe the first shoots of dog's mercury, or at this time of year you might even be looking for conkers with your little ones. You know, you're looking for patterns, those patterns that every plant makes in a distinctive way, patterns, colors and shapes. Now, they would have been looking for that because if they wanted to find yarrow or certain plants that perhaps even we don't even necessarily use very much anymore, or that knowledge has almost been lost. I mean, there are certain people who are still absolutely passionate about using plants medicinally, and there's an entire kind of raft of knowledge that I think is still to be tapped into in terms of you know, using plants to make drugs, you know, that can help anti-cancer, for example. There's an awful lot of lost knowledge, but they would have been absolutely gendered. They would have been literally experts in whatever plants were out there and whatever things. Right, for example, willow bark contains salicylic acid, and that of course is a painkiller. So they probably would have had a stash of willow bark, and willow grows flipping everywhere in the fens because it likes to have its roots in water. But what I'm saying is this group of women and children would have gone into the woods. The kids would have been playing with sticks as any kid would be now, except their clothes probably weren't from Tesco's. Their clothes are probably made out of sort of textiles made from things like nettle and maybe animal skins, or even, you know, duck skins. Sorry pals. They would have been tuning into the botany, and they would have been looking at the patterns, and they'd be looking for particular species. Now, when human eyes, and I'm talking about human eyes in 2022, look at patterns, and I'm going to give you a pretty sexy plant pattern here, and it's a classic. You probably would have seen things like this in most hedgerows, certainly in May. This is actually a relative of cow parsley. It's hogweed, which many of you probably know. It's a very, very common hedgerow plant, and in fact these seeds at the top can be used as a sort of oatmeal. They're quite delicious and non-toxic. When we look at this kind of pattern, our brains respond immediately, and this is actually a fractal. You may have seen me talk. I had a very brief sort of 5-minute slot on Autumn Watch in 2020 because I was talking about exactly this, how our brains respond to literally looking at nature. We don't have to go and stick our nose into a hole in an oak tree and huff up a bunch of moss and beetles and sit there like inhaling it like some kind of, I don't know, bonkers aromatherapy. Like, we don't have to go and literally kind of lick a tree. All we have to do is look at this, and this can be on your screen as well. So this is a fractal. The definition of a fractal is a pattern within which there are repeated motifs, and those motifs are repeated on different scales. So for example, look up, if I might not break it because it's quite precious, but if you look here, there's a bunch of little tiny stemlets coming out of the top of here with the seeds on top, and this pattern echoes this entire, it's basically the same structure as the entire flower. So that is a partial, if not a whole fractal. So this pattern is repeated on different scales in the same structure. And then if you imagine this stem on a larger hogweed plant, the one I picked it from, tiny bit of gilt there, but that whole plant would have then had several other flowers coming off it. So that creates a fractal, and that pattern, that almost like a tiny piece of an algorithm in terms of plant structure, is, our brains are hardwired to respond to it. And I don't even think we're going far enough back in terms of sort of Neolithic and Stone Age, Bronze Age times. I think that kind of pattern, I mean, it doesn't matter what, I'm talking about hogweed because, and it is actually a food plant, but I'm talking about every single plant you can think of has that kind of pattern going on, okay? This is only one element of the landscape that Nancy and Bernard, our Neolithic pals, would have been tuning into. Only one aspect of the botany, the landscape, the greenery, and also the sort of the earth, the soil, the leaf litter. This is just one part of it. And what happens when we look at these patterns now, and of course back then, and that's when these pathways would have been laid down, perhaps even earlier. As I say, I think it's hard to know when these pathways would have been laid down. But when we started to tune into plants and then pick the plants, put them in our gobs, either for medicinal or food purposes, our brains would give us a mental reward. So what I'm talking about is, like, we'd have gone out to forage, found something like this that has actually it has an impact on the survival of those people, right? Get this, pick these seeds off, form them into a sort of granola, eat it, and those people and their children, so those precious genes that they would have passed on, their survival would have increased in a tiny way, but tangibly, okay? And their brains, because they would have, their brains have linked this, and basically when they saw these plants in the environment, in the landscape, their brains would have responded positively because of the link between going and actually sort of eating a blackberry or eating a certain fruit like an apple. See that pattern on an apple tree right now. You see those same patterns. You go and see it and you find an apple tree and you see that slight pinkness, you know, the rosiness of an apple. I'll talk about pink in a moment and what that seeing pink does to our brains. See the pattern, the basic pattern of you think that's not a pylon, it's a tree. Our brains are so immensely tuned into it. We would have got a slight relaxation. Cortisol would have been dialed down. Okay, that's the stress hormone that we were utterly bombarded with inside our minds and in our bodies from the pandemic onwards. And of course, whenever you have an exam, or perhaps you've got someone, a loved one who's very poorly, or perhaps your dog is coming to the end of their lives or whatever, that feeling of this is terrible, I'm really stressed, you either want to run away or you want to have an argument with someone, the fight, flight, and sometimes you want to just shut down and kind of hunker down and hibernate. That cortisol, which is a stress hormone, it's very important for our it's important for many metabolic processes, but we've had it in abundance. We've had too much of it since the pandemic in particular, and you certainly have too much of it if you're in a difficult work environment. Perhaps you work with one or more GITs. It's a technical term that can happen. It's very common. I've been in such situations myself, and so you go into work every day and you're like, oh, it's Nigel. I'm sure most Nigels are lovely, but perhaps let's for example say Nigel is not a very nice colleague. You get that feeling of, oh God, and that's cortisol. Okay, and we've had too much of it the last 2 to 3 years. When humans see this pattern, any of these patterns, plants, cortisol diminishes. Our brains have been shown to recover from stress 60% more quickly when we see patterns like this that are just computer generated. So a bunch of sticks and blobs making a rudimentary fractal that looks little bit like a hogweed, or a little bit like a sort of rudimentary tree, like, you know, like a sapling, where you've got the trunk, then you've got a couple of main branches at the top, and then they divide again, and then they divide again. A very, very rudimentary computer generated tree-like pattern. Humans, modern humans, in the last 4 years this experiment was done, look at those patterns, they recover from stress 60% more quickly. So you think about it, if you literally have a bit of hogweed or some of these, I mean, I'm obsessed with these are good twigs, right? You just have them in your house. If you just have drawings of them, okay, you will have a benefit after or before you look at those hideous headlines. That's some kind of nasty alliteration there, isn't it? There's a lot of hideous headlines around at the moment. You know, climate change, forest fires. Oh, I can't, right, I'm not even going to get talking about the rivers. I literally feel grief about what's happened to our rivers. I'm sure this is a topic that you all feel passionate about. I'm not going to go into that. It's heartbreaking. But right, let's say you've just seen those hideously viral videos of sewage being pumped out into one of our very clean, beautiful beaches, say in Dorset or wherever. It literally hurts my heart so much that I've had to go and have a massive cry about that. Let's say that happens, and it is incessant right now, and I don't quite understand what is happening to our country or to the world, but it's not good, and our mental health is suffering from it. And of course we need to campaign against what is being done to our landscape and environment. But on a personal level, many of us have people to care for, we're parents, or we have to kind of keep ourselves going for partners, or because we have to go into work, or all of the above, you know, or maybe we're caring for someone elderly, and we can't just go in there in an absolute puddle of kind of anguish and tears because we're thinking about the otters. I'm not saying that I don't want to do that. I could happily walk around right now thinking about the fact that otters had returned to pretty much I think all of our rivers. I'm not entirely sure of the stats, but they had returned in a major way. And those food networks, those entire food webs, now completely destroyed. And that in itself causes an enormous amount of cortisol in my brain. I'm sure it does to you. If you are part of the wildlife trusts, you care about the landscape and the environment as much as I do. But we have to keep going despite this onslaught of hideous damage, lasting harm being done to our environments. And so I am saying that we need to make like Bernard and Nancy, 10 to 15 minutes of just spending time in, and I'm not saying I'm going on a particular pilgrimage to go and find autumn ladies' tresses, you know, that really, really sexy little orchid, like the latest flowering orchid in Britain. I actually wrote about it in A Wild Remedy. I went on an orchid hunting trip. I think it was to Northamptonshire, and I found the autumn ladies' tresses, and that was some hardcore dopamine that I got when I found it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a daily walk in order to recalibrate the nerve cells, the soup of neurotransmitters that are at our synapses. We will see some fractals, which will mean that we will recover more quickly from the hideous headlines that we're having to deal with. I mean, it is really having a significant effect on our mental health, whether or not we have loved ones who are very unwell, or we're dealing with grief because some of our loved ones died during COVID, or because of the grief because we're not able to do the job we did before because we got long COVID. You know, this is some major cortisol and grief and depression can develop when this not drip of cortisol, it's like a kind of tsunami of cortisol every flipping day, that changes the way we think, the tone of our thoughts, so that eventually we become less motivated, we become less optimistic, and that can cause depression. But if we go outside every day, and these, when I say 10 to 15 minutes, that's from the original Japanese research that was done from the early 1980s onwards. You will have probably heard of the term forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku. That is the basis of the research around the extremely potent connection between humans and nature, and especially humans' brains, and how they respond to the visuals of nature and the things we inhale. So I've talked about looking at fractals. So Nancy Bernard would have been out there looking at stuff they needed to eat for medicine, also for kind of building their their roundhouses, so building materials and things to, if they had a little bit of livestock, they would have needed sort of certain trees, hazel, willow, probably the same ones, certainly willow in the fens. They would have needed those same trees that we think of now when we think of making structures in the landscape that perhaps are not man-made, like a beautiful willow fence. They would have needed those things. I'm good. So I've talked about like the visuals of those patterns, and that's so immediate. When in our brains, we feel less stress very, very quickly when we see those kinds of patterns. So have some of these next to your bed. I mean, go pick a little bit of hogweed, have it next to your bed or in your living room. You feel like absolute poo. That's a technical term, and apologies if I'm offending anybody. It's not too bad a word. Have these in your home, have houseplants and garden if you can. But what I haven't talked about is actually there's a very strong chemical connection between us and plants. And I don't mean the chemicals that you may immediately think of that perhaps are not legal. I'm talking about the things we inhale. Again, that sounds ropey and very, very questionable. I'm talking about the things that we inhale without even realizing it, when we literally step out of the door into our gardens, or step out of our car into the park, into a green space that you are aiming to walk in with your dog, or just with a pal, or on your own. When we go into a green space, especially today, it's quite a warm day. I mean, it's not like those searing days we had a few months ago, but it's gently warm today. It's a gorgeous day. And it means that any kind of oils, volatile compounds are pretty mobile, in the atmosphere, and they will be moving from the ground, anything near the ground, up our hooters. Now, you may probably guess what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a group of volatile compounds called phytoncides, which sounds very kind of technical. In fact, they're just plant oils, the same plant oils. And there's a certain kind of collection of plant oils that, for example, form that gorgeous newly mown grass smell, which I'm addicted to. Sorry, that's a very loud neighbour. I don't know. I've had ducks and now I've got sorry, apologies. So when we go out into any green space, I mean, I'm at the moment sort of clearing my little back patio, and I'm going to put some violas and some, I've got some winter flowering things already. I'm just waiting for my winter flowering little cherry tree to come into flower. So I'm interacting with green stuff every day at the moment. And I'm doing it for medicinal purposes. I don't need to. None of those are food plants. If it was Bernard, he'd be like, what are you doing? That's just a flower. Can you eat it? That's what he'd be asking. For me, I'm doing it for my mental health, because all of those plants that I'm interacting with right now, I'm doing a bunch of sort of succulent repotting inside, and then outside I'm sort of looking, sort of moving around my kind of cowslips and primulas, and I've got some heathers that are starting to flower. Those don't have any purpose for me in terms of survival. Actually, that sentence is wrong. It is survival right now. It is survival for me. I'm going through a major life change, the kind of life change I was sort of describing, you know, like a very, very, very difficult time. And I'm dosing myself with phytoncides. So the oils that are released by all the plants I'm interacting with in my garden, and also from the trees around. I've got ivy, where it's like an entire bird village in the ivy, and that the ivy's flowering at the moment. There's this lovely gentle scent from that. I've got a crabapple tree. I'm not going to name all the plants in my garden, but there's a lovely cocktail of phytoncides. Every single plant releases a different sort of catalogue, a little collection of oils that is specific to that plant. And the reason they do that is not just for like humans liking a lovely nif. We can't smell most of them. You know, only if you kind of brush past a lavender plant are you necessarily aware of it. Or again, if someone's mown their lawn and you think, oh God, that's a really sexy green smell. I love it. Most of it, it's just small amounts in the air. We inhale it, okay, but then the plants produce it in order to fend off their own pathogens. So they get viruses too, fungi, bacteria. Of course, they get plant diseases. And one thing that helps them to fend those diseases off are these phytoncides, as you may know. So, for example, if you think about curry, if you put ginger with garlic and turmeric and a bunch of other spices, all of which come from plants, of course, and you have that quite pokey curry and you eat it, it can often alleviate the symptoms of colds, right? Cold viruses do not like being in the presence of many of the kind of oils and other chemicals too from those particular scented plants. Phytoncides can fight off viruses in our bodies. They could certainly help us anyway. So they're doing the same role. Sometimes, you know, if you eat certain foods, you can really help to kind of tell cold and flu viruses, not necessarily to completely F off, but certainly on your bike, pack your bags, and, you know, certainly kind of alleviate these symptoms. The plants are doing the same. They're keeping at bay their own microbial illnesses. But when those phytoncides come out into the air and humans inhale them, here's the punchline to this section of the talk. Section is making it sound much more structured than it really is. But when we actually inhale them, within 10 to 15 minutes of being in that environment, because of the phytoncides, our cortisol drops like, well, not like a stone, but it certainly dials right down. So again, it's another, those are just two aspects I've talked about in the environment, the fractal patterns and the phytoncides. And within 10 to 15 minutes, our brain chemistry and the tone of our thoughts, the actual functioning and biochemistry of our nerve cells is altered, and we will feel calmer and also uplifted, because we are seeing, and there's another aspect. I think am I being given the kind of, have I been talking too long? Probably. Probably. But what I'm going to kind of conclude is, I'm just very, very quickly, before I then just say, there's a lot more to this. I've talked about two aspects. One final aspect is beauty. If we look at something that we consider to be beautiful, now this is nipplewort. For most people, it's like, that's a dried old seed head. I think it's exquisite. Okay, I get a little tiny burst of dopamine when I see nipplewort, and it has its name because these look like nipples. And I think a couple of centuries ago, if something looked like a nipple, we'd probably use it to treat mastitis, even though it had no function. Anyway, any of these, I feel, are very beautiful. Humans are tuned in to find plants beautiful. Also blue tits. That's probably because we would have been making blue tit kebabs. That's what Bernard would have had on the menu. But we don't do that. But those pathways are still there. We still get like, oh, a dopamine burst when we see a jay or a green woodpecker. That would have been a food pathway But of course now we can encourage birds to our garden. They benefit and we benefit because we get bursts of dopamine, which are going to help us with the hideous headlines. I'm not going to talk anymore. I could talk all day, but I think my lovely colleagues here are wanting me to wind up or just shut up. I don't know, probably.
Oh, Emma, you know, we could actually sit here and listen to you all day. It's been absolutely both hilarious and really thought-provoking. I mean, really? In the most entertaining way. I've absolutely just really enjoyed the last half hour. I do have one or two, but we've only got a couple of minutes for questions.
Go for it.
I've got one or two.
Because I've waffled too much. I'm so willow waffle. That's what that was.
Everybody wanted to see the ducks, so thank you for showing us the ducks.
I also showed you the foul state of my window, but yeah, they were Muscovy ducks with some slightly mutant-looking faces, but they were just having a chill time.
But there's a couple really interesting points you made in there, and one thing I just took away from that is the importance of multi-sensory approach to nature, because you talked about smell, you talked about sight, you talked about listening, and I thought that, you know, to me, that was really thought-provoking, that it's not just experiencing what you see, it's experiencing so much more than that.
So much more, but also what we see, there's not just one pathway. It's the fractals, it's the shape of a bird, right? I think that we have a pathway that responds to a sort of chicken outline or similar because of, as I say, you know, blue tick kebabs would have been on the menu. It would have been a small snack, but now we can encourage that pathway to trigger as much as possible by feeding the birds, as I'm sure will happen on, you know, on Autumn Watch. I'm planning a project for Winter Watch. I'm hoping they'll go with it because there's a big experiment we can do to see if our cortisol goes down after 20 minutes of bird watching in our garden, and we're going to I want to combine it with the big garden bird watch because it benefits birds, of course it does, and it helps black caps to overwinter, but it helps humans to deal with Twitter and the BBC website. I mean, you know, thank you, sparrows. I feel very strongly that there are bird-focused pathways, and it's so mutually beneficial if we feed the birds. So yeah, absolutely. Fractals we're responding to, the shape of birds, but also the colours. We're looking at the colour pink I didn't get to talk about, but it relaxes. It's used in prisons. If you paint a room pink, people who have terrible mental anguish and are dealing with schizophrenia or whatever, if they put them in a pink room, the calm that comes upon them. And I think that's from looking at rosy apples and picking them when they increased our survival.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that was going to be another question, was what about the pink? But you've explained that.
Oh,
so thank you.
Yeah. I could talk about pink for 2 hours. But it has been. I'm very honoured. Nigella Lawson put a little bit about me in her latest book, Cook, Eat, Repeat, because of the benefits of making rhubarb recipes and salmon, because it's very common. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that. I'm afraid that is actually all we have time for.
No problem.
And I wish we could keep you longer, but thank you so much. I think everybody listening to that, and actually there's been quite a few comments come in from people just to say thank you and to agree with you on forest bathing and collecting baskets of leaves and going out bird watching. So I think we're in agreement here. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, all I can say is that if you take one thing away from my large lump of willowy waffle, it's this: if you feel terrible, I understand there's so many things that can make life absolutely atrocious. I listed only a few of them, but just simply go and sit in a green place. I'm lucky enough to have a garden. If you do too, it doesn't matter how weedy it is. Go and sit there, because our connection with those plants, any green place, is so hardwired. It's so innate. It's so potent that just sitting and looking at some leaves in your garden when you feel like you can't continue with your day, it literally will change the dials. So try and do it daily if you can. You know, you don't have to go on a huge hike to the Hebrides. Sit in your garden, or even just find a flipping bit of waste ground behind the bus stop and go and sit in it. That is my prescription.
Thank you. That's excellent. Thank you so much, Emma. I'm going to pass over to Estelle, but we've really, really appreciated you taking time to come and speak with us today. So
I loved it. I hope it helped a little bit. I wasn't too waffly or duck-based.
No, it was fantastic, Emma. Absolutely fantastic. And that daily dose of nature, absolutely. Let's all get out there and do it. I'm heading out to the garden as soon as we're done here. So
we all need it, right? We all need that.
Okay, all right. Well, you take care. Thank you ever so much for your time.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye, everybody. I hope I didn't go on too long, but
you can sit here all afternoon.
Get outside and look at some leaves and sniff up some good smells.
Okay. Excellent. Right. Okay.
Bye.
All right. Bye, Emma. Bye. All right. Okay. So, well, I hope you enjoyed Emma. Oh my goodness me, I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, great way to spend a Saturday afternoon. Okay, so now we're going to get into our photography competition. So back by popular demand this year, after a 3-year break because of the COVID pandemic, this year the contest invited people to take amazing pictures of wildlife or scenery at one of the Trust's 86 nature reserves, or to capture other people taking action for nature in their community. And we were quite overwhelmed, I have to say, to see how many wonderful entries came in. Some truly stunning images of wildlife, landscapes and people in our area. We had almost 350 photographs submitted across 6 categories, which is just brilliant. And as you can imagine, it was a tough job for our judges, and there was some deliberation as the standard was so high. I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors. So a big thank you to Panasonic, who provided the first prize of a digital camera, and the Chroma for helping with the printing. Also, huge thanks to wildlife photographer Steve Godds from GG Wildlife Experiences, who kindly helped us judge the entries and has provided wildlife photography masterclasses workshops for our winners. Brilliant prize. Thanks also to the editor of our Wild magazine, Ben Van Heems, and to the BBOWT Senior Communications Officer, Kate Tipford, who used their eye for a good photo to help pick the winners. So here's a short video from our judging panel.
We're delighted that the photography competition has returned this year for the first time since 2019. It's been fantastic to see the range of photographs that people have taken on our nature reserves and beyond in their local area where people have been acting for nature.
So we've been through all the photos, and our job was to shortlist them first of all, looking at the light, the composition, and also how difficult it was to get that shot. It's been a really laborious process with lots of debate going on because we want to get it right, shortlist it and again, and then we finally pick our winners. But the competition entrants haven't exactly made it easy for us.
So the winning photo, what I was personally looking for was composition, good use of light. What we've found and what we come across is something quite stunning. A real in the moment shot, perfect angles, perfect light, and actually something I would be very, very happy to have taken myself, and actually when I first saw it I was quite jealous. I think you're going to really enjoy this, and it's a real worthy winner. So well done to the winner.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, panel. So anyway, I have now the lovely job of announcing the winners of BBOWT's photography competition of 2022. Okay, so category flora and fauna. So first up is the flora and fauna category. This was a very tough category, I have to say, as we had so many striking images to choose from. But the winner was this incredible image of a buzzard taking flight, taken at our College Lake Nature Reserve in Buckinghamshire by Roy MacDonald. The runner-up in this category was Adrienne Lobbrag, oh gosh, I can't pronounce her name, with her detailed image of a poppy seed head taken at Bucklebury Common in Berkshire. Congratulations to you both. On to the people in nature category. The winner was Petra Marr, with this joyful image of a young walker on the boardwalk taken amongst the reeds at West Turville Reservoir in Bucks. The runner-up was Lorraine Clark with her photo of a birdwatcher enjoying a quiet spot in a hide at College Lake. Well done to you both. Team Wilder. In the Team Wilder category, the winning image was this lovely photo of a frog poking its head out of the duckweed by Helen Tutcher-Baxon. The runner-up was Peter Massan with his nicely framed photo of a wonderful bug hotel. And that's Team Wilder in action right there. So well done to you both, and thank you. Nature Reserve Landscape. So in the landscape category, the winning image was this beautiful sunrise taken by Charlotte Day early one morning at Chalsey Marsh in Oxfordshire. Very atmospheric, brilliant. John Cairns was the runner-up in this category with his wonderful woodland photo taken at our Warburg Nature Reserve, also in Oxfordshire. Lovely golden light there. Congratulations to you both. And also the teenagers category. So the winner was 14-year-old Zachary Osborne with his stunning photo of our colourful kingfisher. Well done, Zachary. That's absolutely beautiful. 17-year-old Lucy Colston's photo of a marbled white butterfly on a scabious flower was our runner-up. Congratulations, Lucy. That's such a lovely shot. And on to the children's category. So moving on to this category, our winner was 8-year-old Rowley Lewis with his sharp and colourful photo of a shield bug hiding in a flower. I mean, it's absolutely stunning, absolutely stunning. A hummingbird's hawkmoth drinking nectar from a verbena was taken by 7-year-old Hayden Denham. He was runner-up. Again, absolutely fantastic. Congratulations to you both, and great to see such lovely photos from young nature lovers. And finally, on to our overall winner, and that's a drum roll, please. I'm delighted to announce that the overall winner of the BBOWT Photography Competition 2022 and the winner of the Panasonic camera is Roy MacDonald. So Roy, with his beautiful buzzard photograph. So the judges recognised the skill needed to take a photograph of this quality. The detail of the wing feathers is just absolutely beautiful. So many congratulations to Roy and to all our winners. Absolutely fabulous year of entries. Right, and we're pleased to say that the winning photographs will feature in our members' Wild magazine, as well as a special BBOWT calendar for 2023, which will be available to order through our online shop soon. And winners will also be able to enjoy a special wildlife bookshop with Steve from GG Wildlife Experiences. Sorry, a workshop, not a bookshop. Workshop with Steve. So that'd be fantastic. Okay, so it just remains for me to thank our wonderful speaker today, Emma Mitchell. Much appreciated to Emma. And a big thank you to you all for coming along today and for your amazing and continued support for BBOWT. We really couldn't do it without you, so thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I hope to see you again very soon. From all of us here BBOWT, goodbye, and yeah, I'm heading out to the garden now. So thank you ever so much. Cheerio.